What is up guys, my name is the Eagle Soars, as you know, and you're watching some Battlefield 4 beta gameplay on the PlayStation 3. I'm considering bringing some PC gameplay to this channel. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see that from me, but for now I'm just going to stick to console. That's where I've basically stayed for the last 2, 3, 4 years really. I've never really managed to make a permanent switch over to PC, so you know, let me know if you want to see some PC gameplay, and I will by all means go ahead and do that. But for now, I'm going to stick to console unless it's got something that you guys are particularly averse to. So what you're watching is some scout helicopter gameplay using the Z11. I'm playing on the Chinese side here of Siege of Shanghai Conquest, not Domination, of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in a vehicle. I go pretty well in this game, end up with a pretty decent score. I think it was the final kill-death spread was 42-2, which is by far the best Battlefield 4 beta gameplay I've gotten so far, so I figured I'd put it up here and talk about the scout helicopters for a bit. Before I do that though, I do want to talk about the beta so far. So I know I put up a live commentary yesterday. This is of course a post commentary. I'm sure you guys can tell just off the tone of it really, but the beta so far, I've got good impressions of the gameplay. The gunplay, it seems very well balanced in a way that Battlefield 3's gunplay didn't feel in its beta stage. The vehicles, there are a lot of changes to the vehicles and the way that they handle damage and the way that they and the mechanics of them, as in how they move and how they change direction, how they change velocity and so on. You know, that's changed quite a lot. But personally, I feel this game is a much more balanced, much more kind of all-round game than Battlefield 3 was. I think they've gotten the balance right. There are a few bugs here and there. I know that the weapon reloading system, so where at Gamescom E3, DICE was showing off a build of the game where when you reloaded, it would discard all the rounds in that magazine and just swap to a completely new magazine. In a sort of kind of realistic way, in a sense. That's carrying over to the beta, but from what I've heard, I haven't actually unlocked any of the shotguns, so I can't give you a I can't give you a personal impression of this. But from what I've heard, the shotguns there's a glitch with the shotguns and that reload animation where, with that reload mechanic where it doesn't really, that kind of discarding rounds kind of mechanic. It doesn't work with individually loaded shotguns, such that every time you load a round in a shotgun it discards several others or something along those lines. So there are a couple of bugs here and there. There are other bugs as well. One of the particular ones that I've noticed is that this comes into effect a lot on the top of the Charlie flag, is that when you're looking through glass, when you're looking through the glass on the top of that building, say you parachuted on top of Charlie. Before I go on, actually, I do want to say this is the current-gen console view of that building collapse animation that we've seen in such spectacular form on PCs. As you can tell, it doesn't look bad. There's not as many particle effects. There's obviously not as much detail. There's no glass shattering or anything like that, which there is on PC and next-gen consoles, as I understand it. But that's how it looks on current-gen if you're interested. So, that's that. Moving back onto the thing that I was talking about earlier, when you parachute onto the top of the Charlie flag and you're looking through the glass, if you look through the glass at a certain angle, you can still see all the scenery that's below it, but all the enemies become invisible. And that's a very bizarre glitch that's been really irritating and quite frustrating to deal with, because sometimes when you get on top of Charlie, I don't know quite how it works, but sometimes when you look through the glass at a certain angle, it seems that all the enemies seem to disappear, and it gets a bit bizarre, especially when you're trying to capture an enemy base and there are enemies below you, and I've spent time actually not realising that there are enemies below me when I can see through the glass. And all it is that from a certain angle you can't actually see through the glass. Now there are a number of other bugs. I may go into them in more depth in another video, but for now I want to talk about the scout helicopters. There's a number of changes to them that I figured I'd speak about before the beta goes into its open phase tomorrow on the 4th of October. So first things first, momentum is a key change to the scout helicopters now. You know, in Battlefield 3, the scout helicopters had a kind of, it felt like they had no weight. And what I mean by that is, you know, yes, you could move with quite a deal, quite good speed, I suppose. You know, yes, you couldn't ascend very quickly, and you couldn't really descend very quickly either, but you could move with a decent amount of speed. But what would happen is that, say you're, you know, the Siege of Shanghai is a great example of this, because there are lots of tight buildings, as you can see here. You have to sometimes weave in between them and in and out of those buildings. If you're doing this in Battlefield 3, the way that it handles is quite different, because the scout helicopters feel quite light. When you're flying in between those buildings, you can carry quite a lot of speed into the kind of areas between the buildings, and you still be able to make sharp turns, because you can basically kill your speed very, very quickly, because it's almost like it has no momentum. It's like it can decelerate almost instantly. In Battlefield 4, that's not the case. If you go into those buildings with a feeling that, you know, you can carry a lot of speed, if you're trying to carry a lot of speed, what will happen when you try and turn is that, you know, the chopper will be less effective as turning because of the increased speed. So the turn will be slower, but the chopper will also carry its momentum a lot more. So you know, from what I've experienced, the helicopter, say you're coming up to a building and you're turning right to avoid it. Your helicopter, if you're moving at a great degree of speed, or ground speed or whatever, when you try and make that right-hand turn, your chopper will kind of carry its momentum sort of sideways, and it will probably still hit the building if you haven't judged it correctly. So that's something just to be aware of if you haven't played this game or you haven't flown choppers much. The momentum is a key factor that you need to get used to, because it's very different to the way it worked in Battlefield 3. Just because of the way that dodging buildings works is quite different. Second thing is thrust. There's a lot more power in these scout helicopters, and thrust is one of those areas. Weapons is another, and I'll talk about that in a second. But there's a lot more thrust in the choppers. They can change altitude a lot more quickly. So not only can they ascend more quickly because of the thrust, you know, another thing that you'll notice is that if you're coming up to a building and you're trying to make that right-hand turn that I described earlier, you know, you can sort of tilt your chopper out to the right and use the increased thrust to pull you up and away from that building and avoid a crash. So that's quite a nice new thing to have. The scout choppers in Battlefield 3 didn't really have very much power at all. It was a little bit frustrating at times to kind of fly a chopper that was so slow to ascend and descend. Another thing is the camera. The camera's changed, so the camera definitely reflects the momentum and the sort of G-forces on the character, which is kind of a nice kind of immersive feature that they've added into the game. The final thing is weapons. Now, you've noticed probably in this game that the scout helicopter main cannon, which in this game is a 7.62, is just a 7.62mm. I believe there's another option for primary weapon, but that's not in the beta. It's very, very effective against infantry and also against light vehicles, but it is not effective against tanks. Now, whether that will change with a slightly higher caliber cannon, which I believe there will be in the final game, as well as guided missiles, which I also believe will make a return, that's yet to be seen. But the weapons have definitely changed in that the scout choppers have been sort of changed in focus so that they're infantry and light vehicle only, basically, and they're much less effective against heavier armor like tanks, and you have to really take that into account. The other thing that's changed regarding sort of lock-on missiles is that the AA missiles have a lot more range but do a lot less damage, and so do the Stingers. So you can sort of be a bit more aggressive in your flight when when you're getting a lock-on. Not only does it show you the direction from which the lock-on came, but you can also be more aggressive and try and go out and go to the Stinger and try and kill the Stinger in a kind of aggressive manner, because the lock-on weapons do a lot less damage in this game. Anyway, that's all the changes I wanted to cover in this video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you did, please leave a like rating. If you didn't, tell me why. And I will see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.